Ever feel like climate change is this massive puzzle and you're just like, ugh, stuck on the edges? Like, how do I even fit into all of
It
this?
can feel pretty overwhelming.
Totally. Well, today we're diving deep with someone who's piecing that puzzle together in a really unique way.
Yeah, we're talking to Jacob Johnson. He's a climate scientist and policy analyst who honestly brings such a cool perspective to the table.
Right. And he's not just like stuck in a lab somewhere. He's actually out there making change happen.
Totally.
Yeah.
He actually manages the Zero Waste Cities project with the Green Africa Youth Organization.
Plus, he's been featured on like all the major news outlets.
Oh, yeah, TV3, GTV.
Yeah.
The list goes on. This guy really knows his stuff.
Okay, but here's the thing that I think is super cool. Before he was breaking down these complex environmental issues, he was a champion debater.
Wait, really?
Yeah. And apparently those skills come in handy when you're trying to like shift perspectives on something as big as climate change.
Oh, for sure.
Mhm.
Debating teaches you to see all sides in argument, right?
Yeah.
So Jacob brings that critical thinking to everything he does, which is so important when it comes to climate change, because there's a lot of noise out there.
Totally. So no more doom and gloom headlines today. We're all about actionable insights. You ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay, so you hear climate change and you probably picture like melting ice caps, right? Polar bears stranded on shrinking ice floes, that whole thing.
Yeah, the classic images.
But what does it actually mean for you, like, in your daily life?
Right, like how does it actually hit home?
Exactly. And Jacob argues that, well, climate change is experienced subjectively.
It's not just some abstract global average.
Exactly. It hits differently depending on where you are in the world, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, he paints this picture of rising sea levels in Keita, Ghana. Imagine coastal communities literally losing ground to the ocean.
Wow, that's scary.
Right. And while that's happening, people inland are dealing with, well, totally different challenges. Droughts, maybe extreme heat.
Right, so it's not one size fits all.
Exactly. And it's a stark reminder that those climate change impacts, they're not evenly distributed.
That's so true. And it's easy to forget when you're not facing those, like, immediate threats.
Yeah, when it's not literally on your doorstep.
Right. Jacob also contrasts how Scandinavian countries are practically forced to be proactive about this stuff.
They're dealing with the effects of climate change head on.
Exactly, compared to Africa, which has taken more of a reactive stance.
Which, is understandable given all the other challenges the continent faces.
Oh, absolutely. But his point is that Africa is actually one of the most vulnerable regions to climate change, so...
They need to step up their game.
Exactly.
And it's interesting. Jacob's own journey to becoming this, climate champion,
Yeah.
it actually reveals a lot about this whole need for a shift in perspective.
Oh, really? Okay, tell me more.
So get this, he actually considered a law career. Like he even filled out the applications and everything.
Wow, so it was a real possibility.
Totally. But ultimately, he felt drawn back to science.
It's that classic dilemma, right? Following your passion versus what seems more practical.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
But his choice to stick with climate science, it speaks volumes about the urgency he feels about this issue.
Oh, absolutely. And that's actually where his critique of traditional climate change education comes into play.
Oh, interesting. What's his take on that?
So he feels like it's often too theoretical, too stuck in textbooks, and not enough real-world application.
So, like, not enough to inspire people to actually do something about it.
Exactly. He's all about that practical, hands-on learning, the kind that gets people inspired to actually go out and make a difference.
I love that. It's like we all need to connect the dots between knowledge and action, right?
100%. And he brings up this fascinating point about the value of indigenous knowledge.
Oh, interesting.
Like he talks about evil forests.
Evil forests. Okay, that sounds kind of ominous.
Yeah, not exactly the most inviting name, right?
Not really.
But they're actually these traditionally protected areas that modern science is only now starting to recognize as ecologically crucial.
So, like, these communities have been holding on to solutions that we're just starting to understand.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of overlooked solutions.
I love that. And speaking of solutions, Jacob is a bit of a waste management guru. And trust me, this is way more interesting than it sounds.
Oh, yeah. Waste management doesn't exactly scream exciting, but...
Right. But it's actually super important, and Jacob makes it fascinating. Did you know that in Accra, the informal sector collects more waste than the formal one?
Wait, really? That's wild.
Yeah, and it actually highlights just how crucial these often invisible systems are, especially when it comes to climate change.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So how does trash play into this whole climate thing? So basically, it's like when you have those massive landfills, right?
Those mountains of garbage.
Exactly. All that improper waste management, well, it releases methane,
And methane is.
a greenhouse gas.
Hmm.
And get this, it's actually even more potent than carbon dioxide.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that bad.
Yeah, it's like we're accidentally fueling the fire,
Mm.
And Jacob's a huge advocate for zero waste systems.
Zero waste. So like throwing absolutely nothing away.
It sounds daunting, I know, but it's not just about like reducing pollution. It can actually create jobs, support this whole circular economy.
Yeah.
There's so many benefits.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Creating jobs, A&D, helping the planet. Tell me more about this circular economy thing. What's that all about?
So it's like a closed loop, right? Where waste is minimized and resources are constantly being reused.
Okay, so less taking, more like cycling things back.
Exactly. And a great example of that is GAYO's composting facility in Accra. They're actually supplying local farmers with organic compost.
So they're taking like food scraps and stuff and turning it into...
Fertilizer, yeah. Which then reduces the need for those chemical fertilizers, which are like a whole other can of worms.
Oh, totally. Okay, now that's what I'm talking about. Tangible solutions that benefit everyone. It's like, why aren't we doing this everywhere?
Right. It makes you wonder. And that actually leads to a really big question that Jacob raises, which is like, whose responsibility is it to make these changes happen? Individuals versus corporations? It's a big one.
Yeah, it's easy to feel like you're just one person, Like, what difference can I really make?
Exactly. But Jacob doesn't let those big corporations off the hook. He's actually pretty critical of this idea of extended producer responsibility.
Extended producer. What was it?
Extended producer responsibility, EPR. Have you heard of it?
It rings a bell, but yeah, a little refresher wouldn't hurt.
Okay, so basically, it puts the responsibility on companies to, like, manage their products' waste.
Okay, so like recycling programs, that kind of thing.
Exactly. But Jacob argues that it kind of lets them keep churning out all this stuff under the guise of, well, we have a recycling program, without actually addressing the root problem, which is overproduction.
So it's kind of like slapping a green label on something without actually changing the system.
100%. It's a total false solution, which he uses to describe actions that seem helpful on the surface.
Right, but are really just a distraction.
Totally. Like those brands that like brag about using recycled materials, which is great and all.
Right, but they ignore
the mountains of products they're still pumping out. So it's like,
Yeah.
Are you really making a difference?
Okay, so if just focusing on recycling isn't enough, what's the alternative?
Well, Jacob's really calling for a total shift in mindset from just managing waste to actually reducing production in the first place. It's about holding corporations accountable for the entire life cycle of their products.
Okay, so from the moment something is made to the moment it's
Gone. Or ideally, never really gone, but part of that circular system.
Right, back to the beginning.
Right.
That makes so much sense, but it also feels like huge, kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, how do we even begin to tackle that as individuals?
Right. And that's where, it loops back to our own choices. Remember those evil forests? They're actually a really good example of this.
Oh, right, because
Because they show that even small, everyday actions can have this ripple effect.
Okay, so give me an example. What kind of small actions are we talking about?
I mean, something as simple as bringing your own reusable bag to the grocery store, right, instead of grabbing a plastic one. Or choosing that plant-based burger over a beef burger every now and then.
Okay, yeah, I do try to do those things. But are they really making that much of a difference?
Absolutely. Each choice sends a message to those big companies that, hey, we actually care about this stuff.
So it's about, like, shifting the market one purchase at a time.
Exactly. Voting with your wallet, as they say. And it really does make a difference. But Jacob also acknowledges that individual actions can only go so far,
Right, because we still need those big systemic changes.
Exactly. He argues that corporations, as like the big players in this whole thing, they have a much larger responsibility to make those changes happen.
Totally. It can feel so disheartening, when you're trying to do your part and then you see these huge companies getting away with greenwashing.
Oh, I know it. It's like, what's the point, right, if they're not pulling their weight?
Okay, so how do we bridge that gap? How do we make those systemic changes a reality?
Well, remember how we talked about Jacob's background in debate? He actually uses that skill to bring nuance to complex issues.
Oh, yeah, that's so cool.
Like urban planning, especially in a rapidly growing city like Accra.
Yeah, we touched on Accra earlier. What's the urban planning angle here?
So think about traffic congestion, flooding, air pollution, all those issues that are only getting worse with climate change.
Yeah, it's like a perfect storm.
Right. And Jacob points out that simply expanding road networks, which seems like a logical solution.
Right, more roads, less traffic.
Well, it often leads to this thing called induced demand.
Induced demand. What's that?
Basically, it means that if you build more roads, more people will drive cars.
Oh, so it doesn't actually solve the problem. It just brings more cars.
Exactly. It just adds to the problem. And instead of just building more roads, Jacob envisions a different future for Accra. He imagines this sustainable, livable city with a multimodal transport system.
Ooh, I like the sound of that. What's a multimodal?
So think trains, boats, maybe even those electric vehicles everyone's talking about.
Oh, cool. Okay, I love all that. But getting people to ditch their cars can be tough. I mean, they're convenient.
Oh, totally. And that's actually exactly Jacob's point. He emphasizes that to get people on board with green choices, those choices need to be practical and appealing, not just like this ethical obligation.
So make it easy, make it affordable, make it the obvious choice, basically.
Exactly. It's about showing people that living a more sustainable lifestyle doesn't have to mean sacrificing convenience. He uses the example of, like, carpooling versus driving alone, right? It's not enough to just say it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
It needs to be just as easy and affordable to actually compete with those, like, ingrained habits.
Yeah, because if it's a pain, no one's going to do it.
Exactly. And, this is where Jacob draws this really fascinating comparison between the COVID-19 pandemic and the climate crisis.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, I would not have thought to connect those two.
So he pointed out that with COVID, we had those daily statistics, infection rates, death tolls.
Yeah, it was everywhere.
Right. And it made the threat feel super real and urgent. It got people's attention and actually changed their behavior almost overnight.
That's so true. Everyone was glued to the news, constantly checking the numbers. But with climate change, it feels different.
Right. It does, doesn't it? And the impacts are often less immediate, less easily quantifiable. It's harder to connect that heat wave to like a specific number of deaths,
Yeah.
or see how plastic pollution directly impacts our daily lives.
Even though we know deep down that it does.
Yeah,
Partly.
exactly. It's like, how do we bridge that gap? If we don't see like daily climate change headlines like we did with, COVID case numbers back in the day, how do we make the impacts feel real enough to actually spark change?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It really is.
And Jacob doesn't really offer like an easy answer.
Yeah, I imagine not.
But he does challenge us to like connect the dots in our own lives.
Yeah.
He argues that even if we don't have those, big scary statistics constantly in our faces,
Right.
the impacts of climate change are all around us if we just like pay attention.
Okay, I see what you mean. So instead of getting lost in like the global scale of it all.
The doom and gloom.
Right. Exactly. It's about bringing it back to our own communities, our own choices.
100%.
Okay, so tapping into that, like local wisdom, finding those overlooked solutions, like those evil forests, for example.
Exactly.
That's a start. But how do we go from there to actually creating lasting change? It still feels like a pretty massive undertaking.
It is massive. There's no doubt about it. But Jacob's ultimate message is one of hope,
Yeah.
and collective action.
Okay, I like that. Like,
Yeah.
he really believes that by understanding these interconnected systems, from how we manage our waste to how we design our cities to like how much power we give to corporations,
Yeah.
we can actually create a more sustainable future.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together, right?
Totally.
Individuals, communities, businesses, governments.
We all have a role to play.
We all have a role to play. And it's not about waiting for someone else to make the first move, right? It's about each of us asking ourselves, what can I do today to be a part of the solution?
Love that.
Yeah, it's empowering, It gives me hope that we can actually shift the narrative on climate change. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to hear from you, our listeners.
Yeah.
What resonated with you most from Jacob's insights?
Yeah, what really stuck with you? And what actions are you inspired to take in your own lives? Because, as Jacob's journey shows us, even those small steps can lead to incredible change. That's it for our deep dive today, everyone. Keep asking those tough questions, keep seeking out solutions, and most importantly, keep the conversation going. Until next time.